Okay, time for coaching up. I feel like I have a whistle or something. And I know this head thing where my head's floating. It seems kind of interesting. I thought it might actually be apropos for what I'm going to talk about today. I used to coach high school football in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It was one of my great joys in my life. And if any of you guys are watching that I coached back then, hey, I love being your coach. And I've loved hearing about the stories about what happened in your lives afterwards, which were mostly really great things. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about. But something about that. I was telling a story from my coaching days to somebody in the car business the other day. And the story was when I arrived at the school I coached at, they hadn't had much football success in quite a while. And they also didn't have very many pieces of equipment to use. In fact, the locker room or the weight room had been locked up with a padlock, and nobody knew the combination, so we just busted it off. And then we found an old universal weight machine that nobody had used in years and nobody knew how to use. And then in the ditch out behind the practice field, all overgrown, there was a blocking sled, which if you don't know about football, the great big guys that you see on the field, that's one of the things they do. They push this big steel sled around. And so I got my great big guys because I had a bunch of great big guys on this team. And we pulled that sled out of that ditch. It was all rusty. It was covered with weeds and naturally it didn't have the pads on them. Now, this is another thing that some of you know, but some of you might not know. When you hit this thing, there's supposed to be a little foam pad about 3 inches thick that kind of absorbs some of the blow from putting your shoulder into that steel. Well, we didn't have those pads. I'm sure they did at some point in time, but they've long since been lost. I was coaching at a school that didn't have a lot of interest in football at the time. It grew, got better. So we pulled that steel, I think it was a 7-man sled, 6-man sled, out of the ditch. And I got those guys pushing that thing around. They'd hit it, they'd push it, hit it, push it. I found one thing, it was a great place for me to train and teach, because in between hitting, they were happy to hear coach talk and teach his lessons, because then they could relax. Well, it was about 3 weeks later, I think, when I came back to practice with the pads. I had raised money in the community so that we could buy those pads. And the boys asked me, what are those for? Because they'd never seen pads. They'd never seen a blocking sled. They just thought it was something that laid in the ditch. We put those pads on, and they said, oh, we're supposed to hit this thing with the pads, which is much more comfortable. Hitting the blocking sled is never any fun, but hitting it without pads, it's just, bam, hitting the steel. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you this is because sometimes you just got to use what you've got. You got to use the tools you have. You don't wait to get started. You get out and use the tools you have. Now, this may be a story that I've told before. I don't know. I know this is something I tell myself all the time, this go, do, be thing that I've talked about before. But what I'm talking about is, don't wait until you know everything. Don't wait until you got the right tool kit. Don't wait until you've got the right garage. Whatever it is, figure out a way to use the tools you have. Those boys hit that sled and they got stronger in those 2 weeks. And then after we got the pads, they got stronger again. And we made the state playoffs and we became a pretty good football team. And it all started when we pulled that old sled out of the ditch. Look around you. You've got something you can work with. Get out there and make it happen. Hey, let's work together. Let's make some money. Let's all become flipping geniuses. See you next Wednesday.